And the secret of it all, the secret of the earthquake, the secret of the Temple of Fire, the secret of the ocean basin, the secret of the highland is in the heart of the earth, forever invisible to human eyes. Reginald Aldworth Daly. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I'm your host. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this week. I appreciate your support. So far, so good on the technical side of things this week. Have not had any issues with the new version of Audacity since I've reinstalled and all that stuff. Hopefully, we won't experience anything like we did last week. And having me re-record. But if you're listening to this, that obviously didn't happen. But if you're a newcomer, welcome. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you'll peruse our backlog of episodes. And if you're a returning listener, thank you guys as always. Your continued support means a lot to me. If you would all be so kind as to like, rate 5 stars, download, all that kind of good stuff, subscribe, whatever your platform of choice asks you to do, I ask that you please do that to support the channel. Now, this week, we will be continuing our look at the people in North America between the years of 6 and 4000 BC, BCE, whichever of those two dating systems you'd like to use, even though they're technically the same system, it's just the nomenclature around them. So, last week we talked about kind of the last group of humans to make a large-scale migration into North America from Asia. Now, they're probably not the last, but it was definitely like the last large scale. Now, there may be instances of smaller groups coming along or groups living in that area that we talked about, the Aleutian Islands, Alaska, them moving back into Asia at some points and then moving back into the Americas. And of course, there's always the theories regarding peoples sailing from the Pacific to reach the Americas, and we'll get into that stuff later. That's a very interesting topic, in my opinion. But for now, we're going to be covering the peoples who have been in the Americas for quite some time. We've talked about the controversy of dating Homo sapien arrival into North and South America, and how, in my opinion, rising sea level is probably the reason we can't get a firm date just yet, because most likely our distant, the humans who first came to the Americas probably did so via the land bridge in the Bering Strait, but then they probably sailed down, or at least canoed or rowed down the coasts, and of course, as time has gone on, that sea level has risen, so a lot of our early settlements in the Americas might be underwater now. But that's all stuff we've discussed in the past. I encourage you guys to go back and listen. This week we'll be continuing kind of moving south along the Pacific coast in North America. Basically talking about the people to the south of the speakers of the Proto-Escalute language, and in the as well as others. Again, they're probably not the only tribes kind of living in that Arctic Circle border region, but they're the only ones whose language that we have in that area for this early time. Now, I did forget to mention the Algic languages, which is part of the Algonquin. Well, that's the language family that Algonquin belongs to. Now, Algonquin is I think the largest of that language family that's still left. But there are other languages in that family that are still spoken in the Arctic Circle, specifically in what is now central and eastern Canada. Those are mostly Cree languages and dialects, but they probably came up at a later period, And again, they're more in the central and eastern part of what is now Canada. And we'll talk more about that later. But the Algic languages, or the Proto-Algic language families, do exist during this period. I think most linguists do believe that the Proto-Algic language is spoken during this season, sometime around 5000 BC, give or take. And it actually emerges kind of in the region we're going to be talking about. But they're not the only language that is being spoken in that region. We'll be talking about them and some others. And we're also going to talk about some of the classifications for languages. There are a lot of languages spoken in North America that belong to, geographically speaking, very large families. They're very widespread across the continent. Some you have on the West Coast. You may have like a couple of small pockets, but then as you move further east, there are languages belonging to the same family, but are spoken in a much larger geographic region. Now, again, that is not to say that only one language is being spoken in any given region. There's a lot of overlap. Some of these relationships we'll be talking about, though probably not too much this season. Again, we're just kind of going to pinpoint where some of these language families are believed to have originated, and we'll kind of cover what they're doing in the area they're emerging. And then as we go on, we'll talk about, how the languages spread in later seasons. But we'll also be talking about their material culture, though there aren't, at least in North America during this period, material cultures are kind of hard to nail down. There's a lot of what are referred to as material traditions or cultural traditions, where it appears that a wide variety of people with different, again, religious or linguistic backgrounds are still practicing, fairly similar lifestyles. And that's going to continue, at least in North America, for quite a while. But once more agriculture shows up and more sedentary lifestyles, then you begin to see kind of North America kind of follow a path similar to Asia and Europe. And of course, we'll talk about South America later. And by path similar to Europe and Asia, I meant in terms of how the languages are spreading across a kind of a wider geographic range, which is something we've kind of touched on with Proto-Indo-European, and that's going to be a big subject for next season when we get to Europe and kind of Central Asia. But before that, though, I did want to cover, there is an element of myth this episode that we can cover. Because about 300 years into this season, so about 5,700, there is a very powerful eruption in North America, in what is now the state of Oregon. The mountain that is today referred to as Mount Mazama, or as the Klamath peoples refer to it, Tumsene, exploded quite violently. And this mountain collapsed into a caldera, which, that's kind of the smaller domed volcanoes. But that dome collapsed. And into that collapsed hole, eventually this was filled with water from rain and from snow melt and all this other stuff. And that formed Crater Lake. Now, we talked last season about how there is a lot of oral traditions recounting things in the very, very long ago past in North American oral traditions. Native Americans have passed down stories describing, the Ice Age layout of the land that they were still living in. Well, humans have been living around Mount Mazama since at least 10,000 BC, probably earlier. But the Klamath people have a story, describing, the eruption and the environment after that happened and how it was eventually turned into a lake. But according to Klamath religion, that Mount Mazama, or at least the land below Mount Mazama, was inhabited by Lalau. And he's basically the chief of the below world. And he got into a conflict with Skell, who is their sky god, or chief of the above world. Now, these two were not always enemies. Lalau would occasionally come up from the earth and touch the sky and mingle with each other and, just be friends and neighbors with one another. And this is, probably a description of, fairly regular, or at least semi-regular eruptions of lava coming out of the ground and, flying up into the sky. However, according to tradition, Lalau fell, he saw a daughter of a Klamath Indian chief known as Loha, and he fell in love with her. And he, tried to get her to come live with him. However, he was very ugly because he was probably some type of deity of the dead, being an underworld figure. So he did not look very attractive. So he did not, or she did not want to go with him. And this rejection made him extremely angry. And he began to rage and curse the Klamath Indians. They, of course, appealed to Skell for help. And due to these people's pleadings, Skell came down from the sky to the top of Mount Shasta, which is this neighboring mountain not far from Mount Mazama, which is kind of where Shasta would come to the earth. And there they had a very, crazy climactic battle with Skell arrayed on Mount Shasta and Lalau coming from Mount Mazama. And their fight was so ferocious, it caused two medicine men to jump into the pit of the underworld as a sacrifice to try to appease the spirits, as well as inspire Skell to fight harder and throw down Lalau, which eventually he did. And eventually, once Lalau was thrown into the earth, Skell covered the hole to the underworld with the top of Mount Mazama to imprison him forever. And then, as a final act, Skell covered the remains of the pit with water to restore peace and tranquility to the land. Thus, Crater Lake was formed. Now, that's kind of a general overview of the myth. There are some other details. In some instances, Lalau actually kills Skell. And then, Lalau's has his followers take Skell's heart up to his mountain to kind of have a celebratory party, but Skell's followers are able to steal his heart back, and then they're able to use their magic to restore Skell to life. And another part of the story is that when Skell returns, he kills Lalau, and he orders that Lalau's body be cut up and thrown to creatures living in the lake. But these creatures are loyal to Lalau, so Skell's followers come up with the idea to tell them that this is Skell's body that they're eating. And, they basically feed them all these pieces until finally they have to throw Lalau's head into the lake, at which point the creatures recognize it and they don't want to eat Lalau's head, and that explains one of the islands in Crater Lake is actually where Lalau's head basically ended its journey and is now what's known as Wizard Island, which fantastic name for an island. Now, this story was actually not very widely spread to settlers in the region until much later. There was very much a taboo on the lake. A lot of Klamath shamans would not allow, or they would always advise against looking in the direction of Mount Mazama. It was kind of a very, very taboo to look at it. And of course, the lake itself was associated with death. Some Native Americans to this day do not look at the water. They will not go anywhere near the lake. which, it's kind of unfortunate because it's a very beautiful landscape. But of course, if your god of the underworld is buried there, you probably don't want to draw his attention, or at least what remains of his followers' attention. So you could understand why it might be traumatic for the Klamath people living in the area. Now, the Klamath people, there are still some living. I think the last census numbers I saw for them were from 2000, where they're listed as being 170 Klamath Native Americans. And they spoke the Klamath language, which is considered part of the Plateau Penudian language, which is part of a proposed language family called Penudian. Now, this language family is not 100% agreed on, and they're still working out, are these all related families, or are these languages all related, or is there just a lot of overlap due to them, living next to each other? But that's something that is still debated. But the Klamath are one speakers, or their language, I guess, is technically extinct now, though it has seen a revival. It was recorded, and there is a drive from the Klamath and others related to them, or just with a general interest in the subject, to bring the language back. I think they started teaching it again, I think in 2018, 2019, 2020, somewhere in that region, or in that time frame, excuse me. But the other tribe that spoke a Plateau Penudian language was the Modoc tribe. Now, there are more Modoc than Klamath. I think there is around there's around 800 or so, at least as of 2000. They're spread across 3 states: Oregon, Oklahoma, and California. Now, I was able to read the Modoc creation myth. It involves Kumush, also known as Kumuk Umtst, or the Old Man of the Ancestors, or the Primeval Old Man. And he's kind of a god of light, as well as, the creator god, essentially. And by that, he created mankind. He didn't necessarily create the world. But Kumush took his daughter with him to the underworld, where the spirits would dance and sing at night. But when the sun rose, they returned to their graves and became bones. And after 6 days and nights in the land of the spirits, Kumush returned from the underworld, and he took some of the spirits with him. So when he got to the exit of the underworld, he had this big bag or basket of bones. And he tried to get out of the underworld a couple of times, but he wasn't able to do it until his third attempt, when he basically convinced the spirits how great heaven was. And when he got out into the sun, he threw the basket to the ground and shouted, the translation is Indian bones, but he probably didn't say Indian, obviously. I could not find the term he used in Modoc. But then he opened the basket and selected the bones for the various Native American tribes, and he chose the Modoc as the final people he created, and he essentially told them that you will be a small tribe, but your enemies may be many, but they will never defeat you, and you will defeat anyone who comes against you. And then he finished creating the rest of the world and traveled along into heaven with his daughter, and they built a home up in the heavens. Now, that's kind of a rough kind of run around, and you can tell there might be some influences from some other religions in that, but that's the version of the myth that we have today. Now, those are just 2 tribes that are sometimes, again, because the language family is disputed, that are considered part of the Penudian language family. Another tribe that is also kind of included in this, or I shouldn't say tribe, but language family that is sometimes included in the Penudian, though I think most of these days it is, or most of the time these days it's not considered necessarily part of that family. They might just have some loan words originating from one or the other, and that is the Tsimshianic language. And this is spoken today in Canada and Alaska, and there are around 400 speakers, but I think people that are ethnically part of that population, it's a little over 2,000. But the language, while it might be endangered, there are efforts to kind of spread it. It's taught, I think they teach courses on it at the University of Alaska, and I think there are some other places where they do teach it as well. But this is kind of right on the coast, right on the border between Canada and Alaska, where there's like that very little narrow strip of Alaska with the little islands off to the side. That's kind of the region, and I'll try to include it in a map where that language might be spoken. Now, there are other languages that are grouped in with the Penudian, though again, some of these are controversial. Some of them are, still considered part of the Penudian, but this includes the Chinookan, the Takelma, Kalapuyan, and then there's like the coastal Oregon Penudian. There's also Wintuan, Maiduan, and Yak Utian, which these are all subdivisions of potentially the Penudian language family. Though again, all of these are debated to some extent or another, and this language family might not even be a language family, and again, it might just be because these peoples are living in this kind of western coast of the North America region, that they might just have had a lot of interaction and overlap over time. So keep that in mind. Now, they're not the only languages being spoken in this area. There are others. There are the Wakashan, who we mentioned last week when talking about neighbors to the Aleut or the Proto-Escalute languages. The Wakashan, if you look at a map, they're kind of in a kind of a box between the two, Pintuian and the Escalute languages. Right on the coast of what is now Canada. They also on Lake not Lake Victoria, the island Victoria Island, right near I think it's Vancouver. I think is the big Canadian city on that side. No, sorry, it's Vancouver Island. But the big city on Vancouver Island is called Victoria. But Vancouver is like right across the strait from the island. So they're kind of in that region. Now, the people speaking the Wakashan languages, they're not very widespread. They did not have like a very large geographical footprint. But they did, live in the area for quite a while. And they were very successful. And the language did kind of spread out in that region. It has a northern Wakashan, and then there is the there's the southern, and each of those has 3 or 4 different dialects at a minimum. I think northern Wakashan has even more than that. And then there was a third branch, I think, that was Makath or something like that. I think that's its own branch, though I've also seen it sometimes grouped up with the southern Wakashan languages. But geographically speaking, they didn't spread, but they did. The area is filled with a bunch of lakes and rivers, and it would be great for fishing and hunting for any group living there, and they were very successful at that. In fact, the tribes living in Oregon that we've discussed, as well as the Wakashan, salmon runs were a big part of their economy, or at least their food production. Of course, hunting for bears and things like that also, and not to mention, of course, deer and foxes and all that kind of stuff. And of course, they all become reasonably skilled at travel up and down those rivers, as well as the coast. Another language family that exists in the area, and probably they're ancestors of these speakers, even if the language itself wasn't emergent yet, it's at least in the proto stages, is Na-Dene. Now, I've mentioned them before, and there have been attempts to kind of link the Na-Dene to another larger macro family that stretches into what is now Siberia, though those are all kind of controversial or can't be proven. But that would be the Dene-Yeniseian, which connects the Yeniseian languages, which are in central Siberia. But that proposal, again, very controversial and not fully accepted. But the Na-Dene language includes Tlingit, Athabaskan, Ayak. Now, they are mostly concentrated in kind of the northwest of North America at this stage. They're overlapping with and neighbors to the Wakashan, as well as the Escalute peoples. But they do eventually, and we'll cover this more when it happens, they do again begin to migrate to the south at various periods, and they do end up having some speakers along the west coast of places that are now like Washington State, Oregon, California, and then they even have some get to the American Southwest. Navajo, of course, is the most widely spoken Na-Dene language today, and that is very far from their homeland. But that all happens at a much later period. But that is another group whose ancestors are living in the area we're focusing on for this episode. Now, there are also the Haida people. They, at one point, their language at least was grouped into the Na-Dene family. However, now I think most linguists agree that it is a language isolate. There's just some overlap, again, due to how closely they were living to the Na-Dene speakers. And there are about, I think today there's around 12,000 or so split between Canada and the U.S. And I know in the U.S., I think they are grouped in with the Tlingit people, at least in some areas of Alaska, though they do have their own villages in Alaska as well. But there's enough, I guess, overlap that at least they feel comfortable enough to associate with another Native American tribe, at least to help gain recognition and organize a tribal government. Though again, that's all more modern stuff. But I just wanted to mention that. But again, these are just a few of the tribes that are living in the area today. Now, there are probably others, and there definitely are others who, I've briefly mentioned. Again, the Panudian language family is debated. So if that language family doesn't exist, at least the languages I mentioned that are associated with it are also their own isolates at the very least, or they may be related to another language, but that connection hasn't been proven linguistically. So, but there are other peoples living in this area that I have not mentioned, and I'll try and mention them as we go forward, in other episodes when we get to other regions, and we'll kind of backtrack a little bit, though some are, again, beginning to move outside of what is now the Pacific coast of the Americas, as the environment becomes more hospitable. And And then, of course, we'll be talking about some other groups further to the south who, of course, are in what is now Mexico and Central America. But first, what we'll be doing next week is we're going to be going in a little bit more detail on the material traditions, more specifics on tools and pottery, well, not pottery, but basketry and things like that, or at least where I can find it. So once we get done with North America, though, or I guess what is now the U.S. and Canada, we'll be moving into Mexico and then Mesoamerica. But that will be for next week. I think this is a good stopping point for now. And I do apologize for any rough speaking of the language. Some of these are very hard to listen to recordings of. So if I have butchered any pronunciations, I do apologize. And if you guys have any useful tools for, listening to these languages being spoken, I'd very much like to hear those. And you can give me any type of feedback like that via email at waradrevpod@gmail.com. You can send me a direct message on X/Twitter, as well as commenting on any of the YouTube videos. I do appreciate that sort of feedback and constructive criticism and all that kind of good stuff. And I hope you all have enjoyed this week's episode. Please, again, feel free to reach out and like and subscribe and rate 5 stars and all that kind of good stuff. We will be back next week, and until then, I hope you have a good rest of your day and week, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.